Hello, in this video we're going to be talking about the individual sections of the vertebrae, so let's not waste any of your time. Let's get right to it. Now, when we're talking vertebrae, what we want to emphasize in this video is the individual sections of the vertebrae, their functions, what their structure is, and the variances in between there, and a lot of what their purpose and function, which I think I have already said. So starting with the very top, the cervical. Okay, so we're going to talk the cervical aspect, and you can see the C1, the C1 and the C2 for some part. The first cervical, the second cervical are pretty unique in their structure. The C1, as you can see, doesn't really have a true body like the rest of them do. It's almost like a little ring that just kind of sits at the top, and that's by design is the best way of saying that. I couldn't come up with a better phrase, because it has a certain importance to it, and being able to say yes and no are completely by design from C1 and C2, and we're going to showcase that. But again, you can see the prominent faucets. It's going to set at the faucets. It's going to, obviously the skull is going to kind of sit on that, or at times could come in contact with that, and you want that padding, and you can see a little bit of faucet also on the very, very small process at the top, but we'll talk about those. Those particular motions, we'll show that on the screen here coming up. Okay, other components of the C1. And again, the emphasis is on small, but it's really designed, unlike the others. The others have obviously something sitting on them as well. But the difference is the amount of motion that can occur around the C1. The rest of the vertebrae are fairly in place and intact, and with the cartilage in between, pretty set in their motion. There's a little bit of flexibility with that. But with the skull being right on top of the C1, it really has to be designed around some movement and a little bit of heaviness on there. Whereas the C2 is more designed about rotation. And it does have obviously the C1 on that, but now the structure is in place, and we look at the vertebrae in lab or class, we will see that by design, the actual connection or touching of the vertebrae is very limited. The disc does a lot of that, but also the way they sit on each other, kind of like when you stack chairs. You may stack chairs, but there's not a lot of connection points between them. When you sit where the four legs are, there's a point there that they touch, but not much else. The backs don't really come in contact with each other, and the seats certainly don't come in contact with each other very much like you think that they would. And these are kind of designed the same way. And as you can see, the C2 is its structure gives you the ability to turn your head left and right to say, like you're saying no. And of course, the C1 was up and down, and those two motions are huge, not only in nonverbal, but also just the structure of it. Okay, so more about the C2, and again, it's that atlanto-occipital joint. Kind of connection between the atlas, which is what C1 is referred to, and the cranium. It's still got a part of that as one of its major functions. But a big emphasis is shown here in this diagram here, the ability to rotate, kind of on an axis, left and right, up and down. That gives you those abilities and the way they're structured, and that's what brought about based on the way they're built. If you try to put a lumbar at the very, very top, you wouldn't be able to do either of those. They'd be too set kind of in their structure. But looking at the overall cervical vertebrae, and again, certainly the smallest and lightest, when we're looking at them individually, they're noticeably smaller than both the thoracic and the lumbar. And I mentioned the forked process. You can see that in the diagram just right beside me. That's kind of the one that's pointing up. You can see that little forked aspect to it, and then you can see when you look at the side view, there's a little bit of downward arch, okay, on that far side. But when we get to the thoracic and the lumbar, you'll see how that varies in that. And again, all purposeful. And of course, now we've got that prominent foramen in the middle and on the sides, where again, blood vessels, nerve tissue, anything that can be a resource going in and out of the vertebrae, that's where they would kind of weave through. And again, that's all structured and built just from the information that the DNA provides to get that done. We don't have to think about our nerve tissue and our blood vessels working their way into those areas and connecting just in the right manner, but it happens naturally, and it's just one of the phenomenal things about the way the body is structured. Okay, another prominent landmark, as I mentioned, is the C7, the last one, 712, 554. You can feel that one definitely. If you feel the back of your neck come towards the bottom, there's a really prominent bump back there. That's the C7. And again, if you were somebody who had to count vertebrae, the ones in the neck aren't so easy to feel because of the neck muscles and just the size of the spinosus processes. But that's the C7. That's one you can feel. And so if you were somebody who was counting, you would just find that one and say, all right, there's the cervical 7. And then the rest of them, you can actually feel. You could actually work your fingers down the back and count those individual, the 12 thoracic and the 5 lumbar. You could feel those bumps. Okay, getting into the thoracic. Now we're getting into a little bit bulkier vertebrae. Again, the body, the foramen. You can see that the spinosus process is very long and extended now. And if you look at that side view, you can see that it's more flat along the body in that area, and then the process is really angled downward, almost like it's almost, not quite, getting close to a 90-degree turn, but then that's probably closer to a 45, which is kind of be in the middle between 0 and 90, obviously. But pretty prominent downward approach by the process, and certainly a bulkier, thicker, more heavily structured vertebrae. And again, because it's becoming part of the load-bearing process, not nearly like the lumbar is, but it's starting to be able to, needing to handling some weight. Okay, and then you can also see that we've got an additional set of faucets there on the side, again, made for contact, whether it's muscle, skin, whatever. Again, you just don't want a rubbing of anything over a long period of time, just to wear it down or to become a painful situation. Okay, now we move into the lumbar area, and again, even thicker, and you can see that spinosus process, that is really thick compared to the other sets. It's almost like we went from being maybe a finger size to now just a really thick, whether it's compared pinky to middle finger, that thickness difference is noticeable. Of course, a much larger body. And again, part of that, or most of that, is just because of the need for being a load-bearing vertebrae. When people that suffer from back problems, as yours truly does, this is the set of vertebrae that's most looked at. I know when I started going to a chiropractor way back when, I mean, that set, those 5, is the ones that really needed to be worked on to get them to where they were aligned properly. I had some components of the vertebrae that was going left and right, and which made me lean. And when you're 5'7" and a half, not really the half, but when you're 5'7" and probably shrinking, I mean, that's probably what I was when, mid-20s. Who knows where I'm at now, 5 foot, 4'11", whatever. You don't want to lean too much when you're only 5'7" in the first place. So I really had to get those adjusted to get those to be aligned properly, not only for the load bearing, but just the support that is needed from a day-to-day action. Okay, now moving into the sacrum. And again, the reference to a snake head you'll hear from time to time in an anatomy setting, just because it's a very large plate, got that triangle kind of look to it, wide and down to a snout, the rattlesnake head. But you can see in this diagram, and so one of your goals will be is when you're working with a sacrum, is to be able to find those individual sections, and if on the plastic models it's not very obvious, certainly just finding the foramens, you can see those prominent sets of 2 holes there, where again all the resources, the blood vessels, the nerve tissue, everything will be coming in and out of those areas. The sciatic nerve would be one that works its way through those, and of course, as I've mentioned plenty of times, that's one that I continually have to monitor and work with. And for me, my mind flares up. It just isn't like when I sit for long periods of time, or any period of time actually, where the knees are higher than the waist. So like the recliner that I have, just over time, just overuse, or the area that you're actually sitting where the rear end sets has pushed in. And so over time, what once was a good supportive chair where I actually sat, is lower than and it gets below the knees. And when that happens, the sciatic nerve flares up and says, hey, we don't like sitting like this. But a good support pillow is what I use to just kind of make sure I have the proper support. And of course, something on my back, a pillow on there too, and one that makes sure that I press into it. It reminds me to set up. For the most part, like you can even see here, I hunch a lot, and so I got to really focus on sitting back, keeping everything upright and lined as good as possible. But that's the sacrum, and again, one of the things to do is focus on is finding those individual sections. But again, as I already mentioned, not a challenge. Just find the foramens. And it's that one in between, that little plate in between the 2 sets of them. But again, very important, because everything that goes out, because you got to remember that once your spinal cord ends, that's the end of your nerve endings as far as an exit or an entrance into the spinal cord. So all those messages that have to be sent from things, around your knee, and your knee hurts, or you step on something, that all comes from those nerves originate out of the spinal cord from the sacrum area. So when we look at we already have looked at the kind of the nerve map around the body, and all of them have to originate out of that goes down into the lower extremities. Okay, one more about the sacrum. As I mentioned, it has to be a very solid, sturdy plate. And again, as I mentioned, those 4 openings with the nerves and all the resources. So I mentioned nerves, but even the blood vessels that have to go out down into the legs, they've got to come through. They work their way through the vertebrae going down and out and into and all that stuff. So those foramens are really super, super important. Sorry for the dramatic pause here, but I thought I was wrong, but I thought I lost my place as far as my order of screens. But again, one more about the sacrum, and we've kind of already said it all. But again, fused plates that happen over time and lead into the coccyx, which is our next and our last section to talk about. Okay, the coccyx, and of course, if the sacrum is referred to the rattlesnake head, then the coccyx would be referred to the rattlesnake tail, the part that you can hear when they are warning you to stay back. Again, not really that, although it is I can't even think of the right word there, but that is part of the vestigial tail. When you think about your dog or cat, their coccyx is what leads out into their tail, and so we do have the beginning of one. We obviously don't have a tail, which may or may not be cool at some point in time to have a tail to whip around and think of the X-Men character that has one that he or she uses as a weapon to grab things or push things away or knock things out of somebody's hand and that kind of stuff. That would be partially cool. Just think of all the well, never mind. I was going to say something humorous there, but I'll move on. But the coccyx, again, fused, segmented plates, fused together. But again, anywhere from 4 to 5, as you can see, with 5 being the optimal number there. And the last thing we'll say about the coccyx and this video is that part of the injuries, you can certainly feel this, and I'm not going to stand up and turn around and show you where to feel that. That would look awkward in the screen there. But that's your tailbone. You can certainly feel that down there, and of course that is, as I mentioned on the screen, that's something you can kind of break off the end. And if you've ever done that, then you know that that's not something that they can do much with. They just kind of let that heal itself, and then the bone that's chipped away, that's just now loose in there, will eventually dissolve, and your body will do things to kind of make a new ending, kind of round it off as much as possible to where it's not just a sharp thing poking into. But it would have a little bit of pain associated with that. I mean, there would be a little bit of nerves endings in there to have, and of course, just the overall putting that back together. It's not like if you broke your arm that they can do plenty with and need to do plenty with, but the coccyx, that's when it needs to be repaired. So that's our video over vertebrae 2. The next time we come together, we'll be talking about the thoracic cage. We will see you then.